Hey everybody, it's Jordan Yates. Welcome back to another episode of Failing for You. I'm here with a very special guest today, Scott Asai. Scott, thank you so much for coming on. I'm so happy that you're here. Would you please say hello and tell us what it is that you do?
Sure. So thanks for having me, Jordan. Basically, what I do is I help managers become leaders through soft skills. And I work primarily with companies. I tend to work with a lot of tech startups, and I do workshops that are directed towards managers to really give them the skills, which I believe are soft skills, to be able to manage people well. Yeah, I've been doing that since my TED Talk in 2020 and really enjoy it. And I'm excited to just have this conversation with you, and hopefully it'll be beneficial to your guests.
So, Scott, a lot of the things that you talk about are related to soft skills, managerial skills, and things along those lines. And this is really interesting to me, and honestly, a lot of people in the industry, because being technical, a lot of times it's like a joke, like that we all lack soft skills, and it seems to be like a recurring issue. And where did you get the inspiration to start talking about soft skills?
Well, actually, initially when I did my TED Talk and I was applying to different locations, I sort of got gently pushed towards doing soft skills. I originally was going to talk about being an introvert, and I was told that that type of story was too personal and it wasn't enough about the idea. And so, kind of by default to a degree. And then after COVID hit, and I got my video back and I had a reel and I was ready to go, then I had nowhere to speak. And so initially, my thought was actually to go towards tech conferences and tech companies because I felt like they were the best set up for something that was going to be completely remote. And I started to apply to do talks about soft skills because I felt like in the tech industry, it's a very hard skill dominated industry. So I felt like I really wouldn't have any competition. So, I really started doing that for the last, like I said, couple of years, and I've been able to get referrals and a lot of clients via LinkedIn because it's definitely a topic that has picked up over time. And it's not necessarily just tech specific, but I do feel like when you become a manager in that particular industry, it's a challenge because the reason you got hired is not necessarily the skills that are going to serve you in your next role where you're over people.
Yeah, and it's so crazy to me because when you think about what's next in your job and where you're going to go, it always just seems like you start at your entry level, like technical kind of position. And then naturally, the next thing is one day I'll be a manager and then I'll go up the management chain. And it's like, to me that's wild because just because, like you said, you have the technical skills for the job doesn't necessarily mean you would be a good manager. And I talked to you about this beforehand, but something that rings really true to me is the fact that I'm in the point of my career where I'm like, should I be thinking about what's next? And I had my year-end review with my boss today, and I was like, you know what, like, I know typically the next thing is like looking at management positions, but I don't think I want to do that right now. I don't think I'm like fit for that. And maybe it comes with years of experience, maybe because I'm so young, but I'm like, this just isn't attractive to me because I know my skill set well. And it's just something that managerial is just, that's not where I feel comfortable. So I think about applying that to many other people who just do the natural promotion of being a manager after being technical. And I think that it's so crazy that that is what's supposed to be natural because it's so not natural. And I don't know. I just think that that's wild.
Yeah, well, I think you're wise to be really self-aware and kind of know what you're getting into ahead of time. I think a lot of times if people knew the expectations that were set upon them, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people wouldn't even want to apply for that job, let
Yeah.
alone have it. So I think it's really smart that you figured that out early on. Not to say that you can change your mind down the road because you honestly could,
Mm-hmm.
but at this point, like you said before, the next logical move isn't necessarily going to be the best fit for people.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So that's why today I was excited and I wanted to do sort of a role play scenario of, say it's been a year or two, I still have the similar skill set, but I think I want to try doing management. And I want your guidance based off of the skills I'll tell you I have and that I lack, of how I could prepare myself to be a good boss someday. Because currently, my skills that worry me are the fact that I feel like I'm organized enough to where if I look at my stuff, I know what's going on, but I have a really hard time explaining to other people what it is I'm doing. So I'm lucky because my boss is so good at being organized and deciphering through all my crazy notes, but I have a hard time relaying that information to other people. I also have a hard time conceptualizing being in charge of, not in charge of, but guiding somebody else's career, because to me that sounds extremely stressful and I wouldn't know how to handle that, or mentoring people and giving them guidance. So I think I'm really good at my actual job. Like I'm good at, studying ceramic capacitors, doing research, having good deliverables, and I'm even good at public speaking, but man, do I hate management and I just don't like all the admin portion of it. So a year from now, 2 years from now, I still have the same skill set, but I'm like, you know what? I think being a manager is cool. What do I do?
Yeah, well, so in your particular case, and I'm going to try to speak specifically to you based on
Mm-hmm.
what you said, you talked a little bit about organization and not feeling like you can convey the information clearly to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you can organize the information in the first place, you probably are giving yourself not enough credit for being able to convey it. I think really a big part of communication is clarifying, and it's really
Mm-hmm.
kind of trimming the fat. Less is more. And if you can say something in 20 words versus 200, then you definitely should go that route.
Yeah.
And I think it's really a matter of practice. And it's not something that comes naturally. I would even say, like, to a degree, back when blogging was a thing about a decade ago, right? The way you become a better writer is by writing. The way
Yeah.
you become a better speaker is by speaking. The way you become a better manager is by leading. So
Mm-hmm.
I think over time you probably would get better at communicating, and I think it's just sort of figuring out what your style is
Yeah.
and sort of being better at that. But to your second point, which is more about coaching, managing, you mentioned to me that you have a kind of a clear idea of how you grow, how you get
Mm-hmm.
better, things that you've done in your career that have helped you maybe gain new skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's fair to say that you can share that story with other people. Now,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to relate to you and feel like, okay, well, I can do it just the way Jordan did it, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's a starting point. And I think a lot of times leaders are readily, giving advice about certain things, and it's not really from a place where they've been before. And so
Mm-hmm.
for you, maybe just admitting that, hey, I'm not completely comfortable with being able to give people advice about things, but I could just share what's worked for me, and hopefully that'll, maybe motivate them or inspire them to sort of find their own way, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think leading by example is underrated.
Yeah.
A lot of people want to get up there and get on the blowhorn and tell people what to do, when a lot of times they're not being asked to do that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think that understanding what your style is and getting more comfortable with that, I think would help you. I think it's fair to say that the best leaders in any industry are very self-aware.
Yeah.
They understand what their strengths and weaknesses are, and they lean on their strengths and they ask for help or delegate things that are in the areas of weakness. I think that's really, really key for you to do.
Mm-hmm.
But even after that being said, if you still, were leery about doing that, then I think it would be smart for me as your manager or supervisor to be able to maybe come up with other ideas and other
Yeah.
positions that would probably be a better fit. Because
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, I don't think that we should try to fit someone in a box if that box is not a good fit in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny too, because like when I think about managing, I think about being someone's boss, and I'm like, I'm very bossy. Like in my personal life, I'm so bossy. Like you think it would just translate, but I know there's a different kind of touch you have to have when you're doing it in a professional way and not just like bossing your siblings around or your dogs. So I think there's definitely that intangible, which I feel like starts to relate to soft skills.
Mm.
And that's something I don't feel like I lack entirely, but I do lack I don't know what you would call it, but like when I was at a conference last weekend, I'm out doing the happy hour socializing, and I asked our VP, I said, how long do I have to stay here before I've like fulfilled the obligation of being at a social event? And he's like, Jordan, you're not supposed to like ask that out loud. And he's like, but don't be the first one to leave. I said, okay, noted. So I'm so analytical, I forget about the nuances of how to be in these social situations. But then when it comes to articulating myself, I'm fine. So I think it is funny with technical people sometimes when we step to that next level of how to navigate that. But a question I have is, if somebody is not technical, but a really good manager, is there ever issues of them managing the technical people because the technical people don't respect someone who doesn't have a technical background? Is that something you've ever encountered?
Yeah, actually, about 7 or 8 years ago, I worked at a company where it was all online test prep for students,
Mm-hmm.
and it was remote. And I knew nothing about tutoring. And when I went in for the job interview to be the manager, I told them that.
Yeah.
And I knew that I potentially could have shot myself in the foot, but I told them confidently that I understand how to manage people. So using that example, I think it's fair to say that right off the bat, you should sort of address the elephant in the room. If
Yeah.
there is a perceived weakness or a perceived obstacle, you should address it. And once you
Mm-hmm.
do address that, rather than people sort of dancing around it, they know that you are number one aware of it, and
Yeah.
number two you've addressed it, right? So that's I would say like part one of the battle.
Mm-hmm.
After that, I think managing is a lot of juggling. And I like to say that managing is a skill, but it's also like an art form. And
Mm-hmm.
there's so many nuances to it. And there's not like a cookie cutter way to do it. It's sort of like being a conductor in an orchestra. You
Yeah.
don't have the time to be able to give individual attention to everybody at the same time, but you have to guide everyone on the team
Yeah.
together, right? So, I think it's challenging, it's difficult, but understand that someone who manages well, they are smart enough to be able to step in areas where they feel like they can leverage their strengths, and they're
Mm-hmm.
also smart enough to take a step back and maybe ask for help from a teammate and maybe give them the lead to be able to lead in a particular area where they don't feel like they're that competent.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So moving to the next part, which is basically the title of this episode, Bad Bosses, Who's Really at Fault. When you see a lot of the times the people that you're helping getting promoted, and obviously like we said, maybe they lack the actual experience or aptitude or soft skills to be a manager, then whose responsibility is it to get them that training? Like, should this be like an internal program? Should people be seeking this on their own time? Should they just know when to not accept a promotion? Or like, what's your advice there?
Well, I think it first starts with the organization,
Mm-hmm.
and they need to have a clear expectation or a clear standard of what type of skills they're looking for in the first place.
Yeah.
Once they're able to identify that list and look for candidates who have those types of things and they decide to promote them, they have to give them the same type of training that a new employee gets.
Mm-hmm.
So we think of like people who get hired new as they need an orientation, right? And they do.
Yeah.
It's fair, right? They need to learn the culture, the role, etc. But people who are promoted to manager, even though most of the time they're promoted internally, they are being asked to do something that they didn't get initially hired for, right? So
Yeah.
it's almost as if they have a completely new job. Yes, they understand the culture, but they're going to have to make a shift. And what worked for them before is not going to work for them now. So I feel a lot of the responsibility is on the company to make sure that they're setting themselves up to succeed and that new manager up to succeed. Now, after
Mm-hmm.
that, I think it takes an awareness on the manager's side to
Yeah.
understand what he or she brings to the table. And they need to know, hey, this is what I'm good at and this is what I need help in, right? And if there's areas that they need help in, they're going to have to ask for that help.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of managing is learning on the job, and you have to do a little bit of your own, professional development on your own, and then you also can ask for some of that from as a resource from either, previous managers or executives or whatever it may be. But you're going to have to figure out as a manager how to be able to close that gap. And
Yeah,
if you're not able to
absolutely.
close that gap, you have to be very honest with them and let them know, like, hey, I don't think this is a good fit for either side.
Mm-hmm.
If you have enough awareness to do that, then most likely they'll probably work with you to find a better place for you within the company.
Yeah, it's interesting because the last company I worked at, I would say all the managers were pretty decent, but I remember two of the new sales territories got like outside hires for their managers. It wasn't somebody that had been with the company for a long time, because before they were, promoting someone from sales to sales manager, but then at a certain point they started bringing them in. And I honestly think that they did a really good job being external hires, because they came in a position of authority. They weren't somebody where they were like buddy buddy first, and it's like awkward when you have to tell somebody who was the same level as you what to do. How do people mitigate that when they are promoted internally and all of a sudden you're like the boss of your peers that you used to joke around with? Like how do you cope with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the shift, the shift in mentality. I think it's what I explained to people before too is when you go from coworker to boss,
Mm-hmm.
there needs to be a separation between being liked and being respected.
Yeah.
And it's a hard line to sort of balance because you used to be buddy buddy with somebody and now all of a sudden you're their boss, right? So the relationship changes. And I think when push comes to shove, your job as a manager is to try to earn the respect of your team rather than it is to be popular. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow because they want to be friends, they want to be casual and sort of informal. And you don't have to be stiff, you don't have to be mean about things.
Yeah.
But I think understand that you have to be responsible for the outcome and the results of the team. And so therefore sometimes you have to take the blame for a hit that's not yours and you have to give the credit to them when maybe you did the majority of the work. It's a very selfless position and role. And
Mm-hmm.
in order for you to establish that, because everybody sees you in a certain way, maybe they don't view you as a manager. You have to start acting like one. And part of that separation may be a little bit awkward. I think
Mm-hmm.
but I think that's also part of being a professional. It's you're stepping into a role that maybe you're not ready for yet, but you're doing your best to be able to play or prepare for a role, I guess you could say, and
Yeah.
step into a role that you feel like is going to be best suited for helping the company move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because like it's interesting you say like kind of the preparation first, because for me, my whole brand is I'm learning as I go, and like failing for you is, hey, this is what I failed at along the way. This is how I'm figuring it out. But I think that's one of the things that prevents me from wanting to be in management, is because I feel so free being
Yeah.
able to fail and just kind of figure things out as I'm like learning. Whereas when you are someone's boss, yes, there's a learning curve, but there is so much more pressure to show up in a certain way. And I think that that's like kind of hard to do and hard to prepare for, because I mean, so many people leave jobs because they have a bad boss. And it's like, imagine being responsible for that or someone's well-being and like their mental health. Like you affect so much, and I think I'm too empathetic to where I would be like, oh my god, are you guys okay, like what do you need, that I'm afraid I would get walked all over. But then also I don't know, I think I need to grow up a little bit more and mature a little more before I would be ready for something like that. But then I have to remember, not everyone's like me, thank God. So we do have people who are more natural managers. So I think that is interesting, just to kind of know yourself. To like, do you ever do like personality quizzes with any of the services you offer? Is that something that you have a standard form for in any sort of way?
Yeah, so I mean, my previous background really was in coaching, like leadership and
Mm-hmm.
executive coaching. And so one of the assessments that I really like is actually called the Clifton Strengths or the
Okay.
Strengths Finder formally. And really, it's an online assessment that basically gives you your top 5 strengths. And from
Mm-hmm.
there, it's all about the application piece. Because like most psychological assessments, they're pretty accurate because we take them. And unless we cheat,
Yeah.
they're going to give you the results that you think you had. But really the question with most of those types of things is what's next? How do I
Mm-hmm.
apply it, right? So in situations like that, it really boosts your self-awareness, it boosts your confidence, things that are really good at that. But I do want to really talk briefly to your point that you shared, right before this, just about, you know, you love to learn and you feel like, ooh, if I was there and made a mistake, it would affect other people. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a myth that you can't be vulnerable or even humble as a leader when you're in that role. I think
Mm-hmm.
that sometimes when you actually can admit your mistakes, granted you don't want to repeat them, but if you can admit them and make them, I actually think there's a human element to it, that it actually makes people on your team feel like they can relate to you more, right? Rather than feeling like, okay, well, there's this gap between us, and I'm going to keep separating it to let you
Yeah.
know that I'm here and you're there, right? So I think that, you know, being hungry to learn and wanting to grow, I think that's a catalyst for other people to grow. And I think if you ask people who truly love managing or leading people, they get more of a joy out of seeing other people succeed than even themselves succeed.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely think about that sometimes too, is like the pressure of thinking you have to be perfect when in reality, like you do need to know when it's okay to ask for help because I mean, at the end of the day, we're all people. Like we can only have such realistic expectations out of somebody just because they are a manager or in a role, of authority.
Yeah,
So, your business now that you own your own business, correct?
correct.
And so, is this what you're doing full time of coaching and like what kind of offer or what kind of things do you offer?
Well, I primarily do speaking, and I would say a lot of times I'm doing like keynote talks. I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned before, a lot of times companies will bring me in and I'll talk generally to the whole audience. It tends to be on things that are leadership related or soft skill related. And then
Mm-hmm.
after that, I usually get called back to do maybe monthly workshops with the managers. We
Yeah.
have these sort of group meetings and we talk about specific skills I need to sort of beef up. And then from there, if they want some accountability, then I'll offer coaching both individually and in a group setting so that they can actually apply the things that we talk about and they're held accountable to see them actually grow. I think
Yeah.
a way to look at it is like, training and development only works if there's sort of this program in place and there's accountability that's set.
Mm-hmm.
We can tell people to do certain things, but if we don't hold them accountable to them, then it's just head knowledge. And I
Yeah.
think with soft skills, the beauty of it is that you have to practice it and you have to make mistakes with it and you have to, constantly improve on them. And the only way you're going to do that is by real life scenarios. So I think that for me, I try to take people through demonstrations, role playing, sometimes peer coaching, whatever it may be, just to really get them in situations where, okay, the test is going to be what happens today that you didn't plan for. And in order
Yeah.
to pass it, you're going to have to really prepare for that so that when you get faced in that situation, you're able to sort of, access what you already know.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. I like that structure because I was gonna say, like, I bet the when people listen to you talk, they feel really inspired, but it is that follow up of, okay, afterwards, like, let's make sure we're actually doing this. Cause it's one thing to hear it, like, yeah, that's a good idea. And it's another to actually implement it. So I think it's really cool that you're there throughout and helping them and pushing that along. Um, is there any like service that you do or training you do that is like your most repetitive one or the one that you get asked for the most that you would say is the most effective?
Yeah, so I mean, primarily the pain point is always managers.
Mm-hmm.
You and I talked about how that's really like the position that is number one, probably one of the most difficult positions to hold, but also
Mm-hmm.
too, it really controls turnover and retention at most companies, right? If people
Yeah.
leave because they don't like their boss, then you got to fix that, right? So you could argue that it's actually one of the more proactive areas to invest in because you're actually affecting your retention and also even affecting who you're recruiting in the first place because you have a better sense of what you're looking for, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I say a lot of times when people bring me in or companies bring me in, we're talking about managers, but we're talking specifically about soft skills. I would say the top three soft skills that I tend to address are communication, leadership, and emotional intelligence, and probably
Mm-hmm.
in that order. I think communication is sort of the one that is a general one that people could always get better at. And I think a lot of miscommunication and a lot of assuming happens at companies. And if you
Mm-hmm.
cannot fix that, it's going to cause a ripple effect of bad things within your company. So a lot of times, those are the areas that I tend to be brought in the most. And there's other things that I like. I like to talk about, like time management,
Yeah.
empathy, things like that. But for the most part, it's based on needs of a company.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a question I have or advice I'd like you to give is say somebody is currently a manager or working towards being a manager. Do you have any recommendations of like materials like books or videos or audiobooks or training courses that you would say is like something that helps you a lot? Like maybe they're not ready to fully like go to training with you or like call someone like you, but is there like some at-home learning that they can do that you think is very effective or at least a good starting point?
Yeah, so I actually was on a podcast episode really recently, and I was asked this question, so it's very fresh in my mind. I would say
Yeah.
some book resources that are really good is look up the Strengths Finder 2.0. It's an
Okay.
assessment you can take. You can get it through Amazon, you can get it through Gallup. Doesn't really matter, but that's going to really help you become more self aware and identify what your strengths are.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is Good to Great is a really good one by Jim Collins, and it talks about sort of this level 5 leader and what it takes to sort of get to that point. And I
Okay.
think that whether you're aspiring to be a leader or not, I think having leadership skills is going to benefit you in your career, no matter
Oh, for
what.
sure. And home
Um,
life too.
oh, definitely, definitely. Another one that kind of pops in my head that I remember reading a while ago, but it's still sort of, it's there is this idea. It's a book called Human Sigma, which
Okay.
essentially is the idea that when a company takes care of its employees, the employees take care of their customers. And that really is how a company makes money. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're really big into employee engagement these days, right? And that I don't want that just to be a buzzword, but essentially,
Yeah.
as you as a company really invest in your managers take care of your people and your people take care of your customers. And so
Yeah.
it's sort of this trickle down effect. And if you sort of stick to that, I think it's really helpful. Outside of that, I always tell people just get really active on LinkedIn. It's not just enough to have a profile, but you need to be active on there. You need to be reaching out. Comment first if you don't know what to post, but after figure out what it is you want to start posting on, start doing that. I think it's very fair to be able to reach out to people. That's what you did to me, right? Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not fair just to sort of stay on there and be like, oh, be a bystander, right? It's like, would you go to an amusement park and just sit on the bench? No, you're going to
Absolutely
ride the
not.
ride, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's important to be an active participant on there by posting, commenting, sending invitation requests. I would say an advanced thing past there is, hop on a message and then, get on Zoom or whatever platform you like and have a conversation like we did. And really, it's about starting a conversation. It's like if we can't do old school networking face to face because we don't live in the same city or it's just not
Mm-hmm.
conducive to our situation, then who's to say you can't hop on Zoom as long as you sync up time zones?
Yeah,
There's really no
seriously.
excuse.
That's awesome. That's really good advice. I love having a homework assignment after I hear someone talk that I find to be interesting. And of course, guys, you can look up Scott on YouTube and listen to his actual talks. But Scott, where are you located out of? I forgot.
So Santa
California?
Monica,
Okay,
California.
yeah. So if somebody wants to book you because they realize Scott is awesome, we need his training. How hard is it to get on your schedule for training?
I mean, I don't plan too far out. I would just say
Mm-hmm.
the best way is to reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm really
Okay.
active. You can go to my site, which is just my name, scottasai.com. To before I even go that route, I really want to hear what it is that you are trying to solve. Like what is the
Mm-hmm.
need? What is the issue that you're really trying to do? I'm not going to just sort of cookie cutter give you a solution. I really want to hear what's going on and suggest something from there.
Mm-hmm.
So I take pride in doing talks and delivering on what I promised to deliver on, but at the same time too, some people are going to need coaching, some people are going to need workshops, some people are going to need a talk or a combination of the three. So
Yeah.
after having a conversation and being able to get a feel for what it is that they need, then I'm going to suggest something from there, and we just figure it out calendar wise from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. If I wish I had my own company, well, I guess I do, but I'm the only employee. If I if I ever have a lot of employees, Scott, you are coming and you're going to come talk to them, and we're going to do all your workshops. But right now, the overhead of being, the only person at my side company is that it's a lot cheaper. So, but Scott, I appreciate you coming on. I feel like every time I talk to you or come across one of your LinkedIn posts, I just get that much smarter. And I love your LinkedIn posts because your hooks of like the first few words you use are always so good. And I struggle with like, making your first line or whatever it is someone has to read before they click more to be effective. But you're really good at that. So I just wanted to say, great job. I'm so impressed because like I think that's hard and I think you kill it. So
Oh, thank you. I appreciate
yeah,
that. It's definitely something I've been
absolutely.
working on, so that's nice to know.
Yeah, no, it shows through. Like I think it's really obvious like how good it is because I went on your page a couple days ago and I was like, dang, like like I'm clicking on all of these. I want to read them all. So Scott is just a good resource to follow. Even if you don't directly talk to him, just following along with him is going to be beneficial, guys. So I'll link the books that he mentioned and his talks on YouTube, his LinkedIn page, and anywhere else you can find him. I will put in the show notes because I think it's important that you follow along with him. But Scott, I think that's all I had for today. Is there any remaining remarks or advice that you'd like to end on?
No, I mean, I think for those of you who are thinking about being a manager or you're thinking about wanting to sort of beef up your leadership skills, don't wait for your company to engage you on that process. Professional
Mm-hmm.
development is really going to be initiated, and you need to be the catalyst for that process.
Yeah.
And like Jordan mentioned before, just in her own life, of being able to go out there and seek the information that she doesn't have, that's really, really key. I think anything that your company gives you is just sort of gravy on top. It's a bonus.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be the norm. And so, I would just encourage you, if you feel like you need something, you feel like you're lacking something, like reach out. You could reach out to me, you could reach out to Jordan, whatever it may
Don't
be.
reach out to me. I'm just kidding. I'll just send you to Scott. I'm just kidding.
But I mean, find someone who you feel like you can learn from. I really like your sort of model of being sort of in student mode. I think that's really important. And myself, even in a leadership role, I definitely still learn from people a lot. And I think once you get to that point where you feel like you know it all, that's when you start to take a dive. And
Yeah.
so don't ever feel like you've arrived. Always feel like you're a work in progress. And if you continue to do that and stay hungry, then you'll continue to learn and get better.
Everything you say, I'm just like, yes, yes, yes. I agree. It's good content. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you for your words of wisdom and taking time out of your busy life to come on this podcast. I really appreciate it so much. But yeah, guys, that's all we have for today. So thank you so much for listening or watching if you're on YouTube. And as always, I'm your host, Jordan Yates. And in the meantime, I'll be failing for you. See you next week.